Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have 7 INTJ females, and I'll let them introduce themselves. And so Holly, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Sure. My name is Holly. I'm 52, and I am an INTJ, Enneagram 5 Wing 6. And I do IT during the day at my day job, and I am starting a YouTube channel on the side on sustainability. So if you want to check that out, it's Beyond Sustainable Living on YouTube.
Excellent. And Ashleigh?
Hey, I'm Ashleigh. I'm an INTJ, 5 Wing 6, I believe. I've been into MBTI for probably like several years now. I got super into it in college and kind of haven't stopped researching or updating my knowledge on it. So it's pretty exciting to be here and can't wait to hear about all these INTJs because personally, I think I've only met 1 or 2 in real life. So
You all are rare creatures indeed. And Rodella?
Hi, I'm Rodella. I'm an INTJ, 1 Wing 9 in the Enneagram. I'm currently majoring in chemistry at university. And yeah, I've been studying the Enneagram for like 6-7 years now. And it's always great to meet other people who are interested in the MBTI and the Enneagram.
Awesome. And Andria?
My name is Andria. I'm also a type 5 self-preservation. And I guess I recently graduated with an MA in, of course, get this, strategic studies. So that's like the most INTJ thing ever. But yeah.
Very true. And Arlinda?
Hi, I'm Arlinda, INTJ. Not quite sure about my Enneagram. I'm thinking 9 Wing 1 or 1 Wing 9. I'm going between the two, 50-50. And I work in education, and it's good to be here.
Great to have you. And Bernadette?
Hi, I'm Bernadette. I'm 22, graduated from economics, currently working in tech sales.
Great. And LiJo?
So my name is Lindsay, LiJo on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. And during my real job, I work in creative direction. And then also I have a tech startup.
Yeah, Lindsay has a fantastic INTJ channel. If you're an INTJ, you should definitely go check out her channel. It is all shades of amazing. And I'll have Holly's sustainability channel linked below as well. So go check out those two, and I'll have everyone else's social media linked below as well. My first question for you all is, how do you relate to the typical description of the INTJ? What resonates and what doesn't?
I relate to it pretty well, other than the part about how we're robotic and unfeeling. Of course, that's totally untrue. I think I might be a jumper in the OP because I really identify with feeling, I probably even more than TE. So that's the way that I feel different from the standard.
Mm-hmm. I find a lot of INTJs relate to their FI, possibly because it's another introverted function. So introverts tend to sometimes favor their introverted functions too. Sometimes it can feel more real than your extroverted functions because it's in your inner world and it feels more you.
I don't get the robotic thing. I don't feel like I come across that way, but apparently, I mean, no one's ever told me that, but that's just, the description says that, so.
Yeah, you're definitely not robotic. So interesting fact, Personality Hacker says that the type that is most likely to be robotic is actually the TPs. So one of the questions they have to see if someone's a TP or INTP is, has anyone ever called you a robot? It's a joke, but it applies most for that type and not INTJs. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I can agree with Holly there. Like, I relate to the whole like planning thing. Like my life has been, in a sense, like quite purposeful, in which like I've always set an aim and then worked towards it. I see it as like connecting the dots. Like, here's where I am, here's where I want to get to. What do I need to do to get there? Robotic, I don't relate to at all. Like, I have pretty strong feelings. They are fairly internal though, in which like I prefer to process them alone, either through journaling, and also whenever like I can understand when other people are having emotions. I don't think I go about it as eloquently as an FE user might, in which I'm not always externally expressing it, but I do understand.
Yeah. What's often underplayed in INTJs is how intense their feelings can be. It's just internal. Yeah.
I often find that like my approach to things is usually motivated my FI values. So it's like I've never felt that like my emotions are completely separate. Usually my actions are motivated my values and my emotions a lot of the time. So yeah, adding to what Holly and Bernadette said. So that's definitely one of the things, like I don't relate to the whole robotic stereotype at all.
I guess for me, what I do resonate with is the whole mysterious thing. No matter how much information I might disclose, because I can come off pretty talkative, I still feel that there's an air of mystery around me. Like, and I feel like that's how people kind of see me. So I can relate to that one. And again, you know, and also with the what I don't resonate with is the general description of the INTJ, as what you were saying earlier, everyone, about not having feelings. I was like looking through the profile going, where's the part where, you know, we're human, you know, because it seems so terrible. But yeah, no, if anything, my feelings drive me a lot. I mean, a lot.
I would say that, you know, as everyone's kind of saying, the trajectory is something that, you know, I think a lot of us resonate with. There's, you know, kind of like the path that we foresee, and we're like, okay, this is the direction that I'm moving my energy in going forward. And it is aligned with, right, that specific destination kind of down the line. And we're moving our energy towards that way. So that's, I think, a very big part. And I think something that also goes into that is that when we've locked onto that trajectory, that we are in very much kind of a solving oriented state. So if I know that like there's that thing down the line, however far it is, and there's elements that need to be solved in order to get there, it's almost this unyielding obsession of trying to figure out and solve them in order to progress down that direction. So that's kind of, you know, one of the big elements that I definitely resonate with and resonated with in the descriptions. And then, as everyone said before, like the robotic kind of side is, I think that's just the lack of FE, like the lack of expression. And I don't think it's robotic at all. I just think it's not having FE.
That's true. And Andria?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said. I guess I always typed as INTJ, and so I generally related to the different descriptions. One of the cons that they often say are that INTJs are very like judgmental and opinionated and very certain about their opinions, and that's never something that I've related to. People tell me I'm like one of the least judgmental people they've ever met, and I am never, maybe not never, but I don't like pushing my opinions on people or judging where they're coming from. I really would just much rather listen to what they're saying and try to glean a perspective from it.
Interesting. And Ashleigh, did you get the chance to answer?
Yeah, so for me, I've also always typed as INTJ, and most of the time it resonates. However, like everybody said, funny enough, my 2 points for the inaccurate descriptions are the INTJs being highly critical. I agree with Andrea in that most of the time, the standards I hold myself to are significantly higher than what I hold everyone else to. And I prefer to just, you know, let them do their thing, live their life, make their own decisions. You know, I'm never necessarily judging them for that or being critical of that. And so I don't think that's very accurate. And also the being cold or robotic, definitely not accurate. I think any INTJ who says that they're cold and robotic has a lot of learning to still do. And also, I might get some flack for this, but I feel like they're often hyped up as like, you know, INTJs are incredibly intelligent and cerebral and, you know, things like that. And although I do live in my head a lot and I'm constantly thinking and analyzing, I wouldn't say it's like this mastermind, like elaborate, super detailed way of going about the world. It's more so that's just how I process things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So as an INTJ female, have y'all ever considered being INFJ? Because I know that a lot of INTJ females tend to consider at some point, well, possibly maybe INFJ, like for a split second or for a while. I hear that a lot. Yeah.
Well, my mom was an INFJ, and she, you know, like when I was in high school or college, she would talk to me about how come you're not more concerned with other people's, the whole FE, basically. And so I knew right away I wasn't that. So, and
Mhm.
you know, I knew, like, she would say something, and then, or I would say something, let's say at the dinner table, like at Thanksgiving, with the whole family there, and it apparently wasn't maybe the most appropriate thing, and she would kick me under the table. And one time I'm like, why did you kick me under the table? Just didn't get the social cue there. So I knew pretty early on that I wouldn't have ever thought I was INFJ, because I kind of saw her that way. And I looked
Mhm.
like her.
Mhm. Yeah.
I really related to the thinking anyway. So the thinking, extroverted thinking.
Mhm. Yeah. I find that INTJs tend to know they're INTJ, but when they do have that doubt, it tends to, if it goes a certain direction, it tends to go towards the INFJ direction. Especially because you're female too, so it might kind of make you consider maybe being a feeler because of that.
I will say that my mom and I did seem like just two peas in a pod, and most other ways aside from the FE, we really we were a lot alike, and we were both really weird in similar ways from everybody else. So I can see why people would think that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never really doubted INTJ, not because I'm super set on it. I actually constantly question it and try and compare myself to other types. But for me, the biggest difference is the TI and TE. You know, I find TI tasks exhausting. I can do it when it's important for a short period of time, but I'd rather find the most efficient way to do things and set it up to run smoothly rather than hammer out the little things for myself. And also the difference between FI and FE as well always resonated with me, where, you know, FE just doesn't quite click for me. And so I haven't really had any doubt of being a feeler, potentially another thinker, but not quite a feeler.
Yeah.
I think so. When I started out, I used to get like INTJ, INTP on the like online quizzes, but I think I kind of concluded I was INTJ. But like more recently, I think as I've developed my FI more, I think there has been instances where I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just like a jumper INFJ. But a lot of my FE responses, like I think I've gotten to a stage where I can at least fake FE, but like those are very learned and practiced responses. That's not my like natural state.
Yeah. I find jumper INTJs, they tend to be more likely to think they're INFJ, because technically, if they're FI heavy, then dichotomy-wise, they would be kind of like on the INFJ side if they didn't know about the functions. But when you know about the functions, it becomes way easier to know that you're an INTJ. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The reason why I bring this up is because I have some friends who are INTJ, and they do tend to score within that realm, INTJ, INTP, and INFJ. It tends to be the common types that INTJs will get on tests. Yeah, but they're just, yeah, a grain of salt. Yeah.
I'll just add one thing. The very first time I was ever typed was through my HR department, and they typed me as INTJ. So I was kind of probably biased when I took the online test many times after that. I always got
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
I was pretty confident from the beginning.
Yeah.
It really resonated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So y'all are very INTJ. Great.
I think for a period of time, I considered the possibility of being an INFJ. Like the fact that I was on the NISE axis was always fairly clear. It was primarily because when I observe myself, like I saw that it was almost like the internal dialogue was primarily like NIFI. So I assumed that that was INFJ characteristic. But then whenever I would read and look up and try to like gather more information regarding to like how does FE versus FI work, I couldn't really relate to FE at all. Like, it was very difficult for me to understand that whole, like, I'm always aware of how I feel about something. I don't project it, but I am always aware and monitoring it.
Yeah.
I know for myself, when I took like my first online test, like where I actually like looked at the results and everything, the level that it resonated was so definite with me that it like basically took my breath away. I was like, wow, there's someone else on this planet who understands my brain. Like there's at least one other person. And just that moment alone was so impactful because and I talk about this sometimes, but like I feel as though NI has a high standard for understanding. Like we're seeing through the lens of what is or is not understood and how to achieve understanding in certain areas. So we hold this high level of understanding as a standard, and so feeling as though you are not understood, I feel like hits in a different way for us sometimes. And so that moment was something I really won't forget. And I do remember though, getting introduced to the MBTI community, there were some threads about, oh, am I an INFJ? Am I an INTJ? I remember looking at one of the INFJ descriptions and being like, no, I really just, I see where they're going. I see how someone would get down this trail, but I was like, something about this is not me at all. So I was always really confident with the type.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so I'm wondering, what would you add to the INTJ descriptions if you could add something?
I mean, this just kind of goes along with the other question. Aside from, I mean, once you understand the cognitive functions, I think that the only thing I would improve on the descriptions probably would be the FE part of it. How we're maybe they could describe more how, even though we don't express our feelings outwardly so much and relate to other people verbally with our feelings, we still feel deeply. So they could maybe put that in there. That would be nice. I would really appreciate if they would do that.
Yeah, like at work, I feel like I always thought that I expressed a lot of FE because it's kind of a very FE environment. But I do feel like I'm on stage, like it's the spotlight's on me. So I kind of have to go with the flow there with the whole being on stage and like pivoting in the moment and stuff. And so I feel like I do that, but then like, but it just doesn't feel natural. It takes a lot of my energy. And then when I go back, to my office or at home, I just kind of like put the blankets over my head and I'm done. I don't like doing it, but I feel like I can show it a little bit.
Yeah, just to jump off something you said, Arlinda, I agree. I think a lot of INTJs, I know 3 other ones in my city, and I think all of us are actually pretty good at faking FE when we get a little older. Maybe not as like in high school, but I think what we do kind of learn because we're forced to learn that, especially being female probably. So I thought that was kind of maybe they could talk. I just think more clear explanations about the feeling side of INTJs would be good.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's also something I feel like has come more with age. I feel like I related to the description more easily when I was younger, but now like as I'm more of a balanced human being, it's like I'm not fitting in the stereotypes anymore. It was easier at first, but now it's becoming more difficult. So maybe the growth process can be better laid out. And I also think there needs to be more about like our inferior SE and how much we struggle with like actual physical reality initially. That'd be great.
Yeah, that is so true.
I actually love what you just said about not fitting the stereotype as well. Now, as you're getting older, I feel like when I first read it, I was like, oh my gosh, definitely. I'm super objective. I'm super rational. I think through things really well. And then as I get older and acknowledge like, oh, people's emotions do matter when taking things into consideration, or, oh, maybe I wasn't being as rational as I thought because I was, not considering these other options and I thought this was the best way, or things like that, talking about kind of those growths through the functions. And I definitely agree that some more inferior SE related things would probably be beneficial to some INTJs out there. Because I know that impacts me in my day-to-day more than I really think about.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, Ashleigh, what you said earlier about there's too much emphasis on like the mastermind It almost seems like when you read it now, it's very much like almost a caricature of an INTJ that you may see in film or something, you know, and it doesn't seem very human, or like all the little daily quirks that we have to deal with. You don't see that side of it. It's just a very streamlined, kind of sleek picture of an INTJ.
Okay, I have to say I'm pretty mastermindy. I'm pretty hardcore planning and far-reaching into the future and real structure with all that. So maybe it depends on the
yeah. Well, I think that's true, but also like the way it's depicted, because for us it's very much normal. Like it's just kind of how we see the world. But when other people point it out, like they make it into something bigger than it is to us, and I think that comes across in the description.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying INTJs aren't intelligent or aren't mastermindy. I think we are, but I think it's definitely hyped up in most descriptions. And even though that is part of our life, it's kind of just like a routine part, not necessarily like the biggest part of being an INTJ. But I guess maybe for people who don't plan and mastermind, that might seem significant.
Yeah, since it's our dominant function, it just seems natural. But to everybody else, it really does stand out, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the mastermind thing kind of applies to like when I'm planning about myself and where I want to see myself. It's not so much, oh, I'm planning to like take over the world or like save humanity. That's not what I'm doing, like at least not on an everyday level. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's like a long-term goal. Sorry, Andrea, did you need to go?
No, I was just joking.
Yeah, for me, it's like I don't like the term mastermind, but manipulation is more for what I would term it. I do have these like extensive plans that will last for a few years, that, you know, I'm taking care of it bit by bit. But it's not just the plan, it's like manipulation of people too, that's part of the plan. So I feel like that might be kind of the mastermind. It's kind of like, I know how this person works here, so I'm gonna talk to this person in this way to appeal to them, and then they'll do what I won't ask them to do it, they'll just do it because it's kind of like I manipulated them. And it's not in a bad way, it's just kind of like, to me it feels kind of like I'm a consultant, you know, it's just kind of getting them to come up with it, and then they do what I, you know, want, that I know is gonna be good for the group. So I'll do that with a lot of people around me. And yeah, and I'm okay with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's just a form of manipulation and plans put into place, and it's very meticulously put into place. It's very careful, very deliberate, and so that's where I think it might look like a master plan to me. But it's just that just seems like such a powerful word. You know?
Well, and like manipulation can be taken two ways, positive or negative. You know, so the way you're saying it is in the positive way. And I do the same thing, but I think of it as I'm using the resources of other people in my sphere to best, like using people doesn't sound good, but like you figure out who would be best suited to do what part of your goal. Like, let's say you have a small business, you would pick this kind of person to do the administrative work and that kind of person to do the sales, for example. So it's manipulation in the sense that you're trying to like strategize what would be the best fit for this person versus that person.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's not like the other people don't want to do it. It's kind of like they realize, oh, I can do this, you know? Yeah.
It's like a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
If I was to change something in the description, it would be putting a warning label on NI to be like, this is a crazy function in terms of how it is. So I think what a lot of people don't realize about NI, especially when it's in the first slot, is that our brain will subconsciously see, 6 steps down the road, and we will unconsciously make decisions in steps 1 and 2 based off what we know is going to happen, but we're not consciously realizing that. And so what will happen as a result of that is all of a sudden we'll be going throughout our day and, we've made some choices and decisions and we're going towards that trajectory once again. But then we'll stop and we'll be like, well, wait, why did I actually was I okay with the fact that I made this decision this way? And like, we'll kind of check in with our FI to be like, okay, was this okay with me? And then we realize that we're like, I knew, I could see that this was going to go down this route. And because of that, this is why I had made this decision. But our NI is doing that constantly. So it's like you have this program in your brain that's seeing down the line and is firing off decisions based off the ripple effect and the repercussions of what is the current circumstance. And how to get there. And so I think it's hard for people to absorb, and I'm still kind of understanding the fullness of what that means in terms of how I have to elevate my own consciousness to like see that more clearly, because it really dictates so much of our lives. And it's kind of crazy to be always making decisions based off things that aren't there, but will be there in the future.
Yeah, 100% relate to that. And it's almost like you don't even know you're doing it. It's just breathing in. And the only way that I realized I was doing that is people started asking me, why are you doing that? And I'm like, well, because of blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I started realizing that I was projecting, knowing what would happen and making those decisions based off of that. And other people were not caught up. So yeah, I really relate to that a lot.
Yeah, I think I relate to that, what you said, Lindsay, and what you said, Holly, as well. Like that I relate to quite a bit. As far as I remember, there's always been this driving thing. You know, it's like I could see it like sunlight. It was always there. And then without me realizing, in the back of my head, I would make decisions like, yes, does this further me towards that? Yes, do this. Does this further me more towards that? Okay, prioritize that. Does this take away from that? No, don't do that. Anything in the middle becomes like neutral ground once I've accomplished this thing. And I thought that was normal because that was just the way that I did things, until my friend was like, you take things so seriously. Why do you do this? And then I'm like, I'm not sure. This just feels normal to me. This just feels like the way things are, right? Like, it was actually like when I had a recent conversation with an INFP, right? They were talking about how like for them, they enjoy like, you know, exploring the possibilities. And then they were like, oh, when life happens to them, it becomes exciting because it proves the possibilities. They're like, oh, that's what's going to happen. And for me, it's always been very much like, what is the possibility that I want? I pick that and then I work towards it.
So with INTJs, like they're working towards this objective that they have. And so side note, I noticed, so when I was setting up this panel, I noticed that when INTJs reply to me, they're very formal in how they write back to me. Like it's some sort of INTJ thing. So I was wondering, how come you guys are so formal through email and through Messenger? I think some people might wonder this too.
I can say that for me, I have noticed that as well. My mom, INFJ mom, was pretty formal too. But so maybe I got apart from her. But I think mainly for me, it's because it's the FE. I think I'm worried I'm going to set somebody off or come across wrong or be misunderstood. So I'm real careful. As much as possible, I'm careful when I'm communicating. It's kind of a paranoia, really, constant.
I think it's probably like probably due to two reasons on my end. Like the first one is like I'm not very good at gauging like what's socially appropriate. So I stick to, so long as I maintain baseline respectful, it's gonna fly by. That's gonna be okay. So I choose to be formal because I'm like, okay, nobody can get objectively like, you know, kind of like they feel bad because of that. Like I can't offend anyone objectively because I'm being respectful so long as I'm formal. The second thing is because I went down this rabbit hole of thinking like communication's an interesting thing. It's paradoxical, right? Communication you use to convey something, but at the same time, you can confuse someone in terms of meaning. So I keep things extremely short and to the point, and generally like that entails some action item, just because it's like, I'm like, I will convey what is needed, nothing more, nothing less, no room for misunderstanding, done.
That's interesting. So actually, I was wondering, I noticed when you type to people, like you like to add like a period at the end of your sentences. I was wondering, where that came from and your history with that, or just anything you want to share about that.
I mean, that's just grammatically correct. Like, I just end my sentences with periods most of the time. And I actually think I tweeted about this recently, where a lot of people will think I'm coming off abrasive or short, or that, you know, I'm mad at them or don't like them or I'm cold, but I'm genuinely just like, thank you very much, period. Like, you know, it's nothing really deep in that sense. Although I was laughing when you made the formal comment, because I know that when I was messaging you and you had invited me, it was very formal, but I don't really think about it much. If I don't know you personally, I'm not going to interact personally. So I kind of default to this removed formal communication. You know, after this, I might be, hey, girl, you know, but for the most part, if I don't know who you are, or if I'm not familiar with you or how you communicate yourself, I'm not going to open up in that way. And I'm mostly just going to leave it cordial, formal, you know, nice, and kind of leave it at that. The periods thing, though, it's just a period. There's nothing really to it. Just completing my thought. And, you know, I think sometimes I don't use a period and I'll spice it up, but for the most part, it just makes sense in my head too.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I did notice, like, with the INTJs, there's like that sort of short and to the point type of writing style, which is why I called it like formal. It's pretty interesting.
Kind of what you were starting to go down the road of, Joyce, is like, with those kind of writing interactions, the first thing in my brain is like, what is the point of this interaction? And so if the point of the interaction is to communicate a date and a time for something, well, okay, we did that and now it's over, you know? And so, and you know, same thing with work emails, all of that. I'm just like, and that's just the default wiring, right? That's just my brain saying, what is the point of this interaction? And then, you know, in a non-growth minded state, that's all you can see. And so if we just play like what we do best card, it's going to be very formal, short, to the point, you know, because that's the point of the interaction. Now, if we're like, okay, how do I make this more enjoyable for the other person, because I want to grow my other functions, then, you know, we can try other things. But honestly, I think I realized in the past few years how little I was ever doing that in the past, you know, judging off some other people's interactions towards me and being like, wow, I really skip over the pleasantries, and it's just, what are we talking about right now? That's important.
Yeah, that's how it feels like.
It just takes the energy. It takes a lot of energy to do that. I mean, I can do it in little bursts, but frankly, it's like, do I have to? I'll do it when it's needed. But if it's someone close to me, I'm not gonna do it. I will say I agree about if the person, with Ashleigh, she said, you know, if I don't really know the person, I'm gonna default to formal. Really, unless you're in my close family or someone I work with every day at work, it's going to be formal anyway. So.
Yeah, for me, I like being to the point and like efficient, because I want to minimize the amount of communication I have to do, like not in a negative sense, but in a TE efficiency kind of way. And also, I guess I found myself in like working with people very often. I think I've learned to like get to know the other people and kind of change my tone and cater to that. So if I have a good idea of, okay, what kind of a person this is, like if they're high FE users, I usually try to like open in a way that fits them more, or like would like be more warm, versus when I know it's like a T user or like someone who just prefers the point, I'll just give them the point.
I'll try to do it with like a smile, you know, because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So, but I am pretty direct, and I realize it. That's why I kind of add the smile at the end sometimes.
I think this is actually like pretty interesting, because my coworker, who I suspect has FE, I actually notice the difference in the way that we write emails, right? Like my emails rarely ever are longer than 3 sentences maximum. And if I can fit everything that needs to be conveyed in the subject line, that's better. So it's like even less. And I noticed that he would write emails that were very, very, very long, like 2 paragraphs, right? Like to turn down someone because like, hey, it doesn't look like it's going to be a fit for us to work together with you. He would go like, oh, it doesn't look like it's going to be a great fit for now, but we'd be happy to help you out. I've put you in our newsletter to make sure that you're up to date. I would just say, hey, doesn't look like it's a good fit for now. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Best regards. Done, right? So it's kind of interesting because we have an email tracker which tracks like the open rates and the reply rates for these two different variants of emails. And we can like notice certain correlations between my style of email being opened by a certain type of personality and his style of email being more appealing to a certain type of personality. And it's also interesting the way he reasons why he writes those emails, because it's very much, I want to make them feel comfortable. They probably feel bad that, it's like we had to turn them down. So I want to make sure that they're feeling okay. And my reasoning is, okay, if I write it really short, then they can take a look at this in the middle of their day. It's not going to take up too much time. That's my understanding of caring about someone. So it's interesting because I didn't realize it until we both had to write an email, and then I could really see those differences there.
Yeah, ditto that, Bernadette. I enjoy reading those FE, those really long, I'm just like, oh, it makes me feel so warm and fuzzy on the inside. And then here's my response. And yeah, I can't do it. I can't do the full paragraph of all this FE. I'm just kind of a straight shooter. Here it is. And maybe I'll put a smile at the end and talk to you later or something like that. Yeah.
I notice when a TJ uses a smiley face versus an FJ using a smiley face, because I can tell, I can feel it in a TJ's mind when they're putting the smiley face. There's some sort of strategic reason for why they're doing it. I can feel it through how they're writing it. With FE, you don't feel that same like, oh, they're doing this to compensate for the fact that it was too direct. Mm-hmm. Like, so I can tell when a TJ is adding more emotion to it, but it still seems very TJ. Mm-hmm.
I have started taking suggestions from my colleagues to make my email sound more friendlier. Like one of which is swapping out my best regards with cheers or warm wishes instead. Putting smiley face whenever it seems slightly appropriate or I'm bearing some type of bad news. So yeah, like hopefully it's helped.
Yeah, there's this type of intentionalness when TJs add like a warmth to their email that is kind of obvious to me sometimes. I'm like, oh, I can feel some sort of strategy in this. Yeah, Andria too. And her messages to me are very like short and concise as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said.
Mm-hmm. Joyce, I'm curious, Joyce, when you can see that, do you think it's just because you're trained in MBTI, or do you think a lot of FE users would notice INTJ, intentional emotion?
I think it's because I'm trained in MBTI, but I noticed it before I applied type to it too. I just didn't have a name for it. I'm like, oh, I have this friend. I didn't know it was called TJ, but it was like she's very TJ. And then I noticed one day her email started to get like slightly warmer. It's like she was taking feedback on how to make it less like bam. And she's like add some emotion to it. I'm like, wow, she's really making an effort. I appreciate it. But feelers notice when you have to take an extra thought to do it, because for us sometimes it's a little more automatic. So to notice that you're taking that extra step is fascinating to us, because we notice the changes in how you're typing.
That is so cool that y'all are like that. I wish I had more of that naturally, but I do think that FE, I don't know about the rest of you, but FE for me is much easier when I'm writing. And maybe because I'm just older, I've just learned. I remember when I was younger, I was not good with this, but I'm much better at writing FE than speaking FE. It probably comes across more natural, I guess. And speaking, it's probably pretty fake sounding sometimes.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that. I try to use like all of the emojis and I use exclamation marks in writing, but like I never say anything that sounds like it should end with an exclamation mark. So I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's just me, but I'm curious if you guys have the same experience, because I personally feel I've gotten better at FE as I've like tapped more into my own FI and understanding my own emotions. But like, I wonder how, if I was in the other person's shoes, I would like perceive it. And that's usually be like, maybe if I add this, it'll sound nicer to me. So it should sound nicer to them. It's kind of like that.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. Bernadette, I was laughing at your best regards because I've had that as my email signature for so long. And I have had multiple people be like, oh, that's, kind of not very friendly. And I'm just like, I thought that was the warmest option out of all of them that made me feel also comfortable using it. So that was just funny to me. But I do think that I have gotten better with like being a chameleon in that sense of like trying to fit in with the conversation of the people around me and shift perspectives to figure kind of the best way to communicate with them. And that is also a note I had to talk about during this panel as well, is just how it's very much so a learned behavior, and it comes from, my studies in sociology and psychology and personality psychology. All of those things I've learned, I use to kind of perspective shift and, using my NI to kind of gauge the other person's experience so I can better tailor my response. But, I typically only use that when I have to. And I think Lindsay had said something about skipping the pleasantries, and I'm definitely guilty of that. And it's not on purpose. I'm just like, you ask me a question and I'm like, boom, 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 boom. But then I completely disregard the, oh, hey, how was the weekend? Like, I hope you're doing well. And I have to go back in, and this is why I edit everything, and add in those little pleasantries or niceties to kind of make it sound, more friendly and make the person want to communicate with me. And I have noticed I've gotten better at that in real time also, just because of my work in some nonprofits and having to communicate with multiple people and be on good terms with people and represent, the nonprofit well. So, but it's definitely absolutely a learned behavior, I would say. And it's not always on point, even with all the practice. Sometimes I think I nailed it and the person, might not feel that way at all. So still a work in progress for me personally.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. Like whenever I have to like get on to meetings, especially like client facing ones, like I've benefited a lot from getting feedback from FE users on how to be better, because small talk used to be something that I couldn't, it wasn't like I couldn't understand it when other people were doing it because I understood it. But when I had to do it myself, I couldn't think of questions. So it's like a typical meeting that I would usually have was, okay, hi, everyone. Everyone's here. Everyone's joined. Okay, let's wait 5 minutes for everyone to join. And then I wouldn't know, like the thought of asking, like, how are you? How was your weekend? That wouldn't occur in my head. I would just go straight to, okay, so the purpose of this meeting today is to discuss this, this. I'll start by asking you this question, this question, this question. And it's actually been really helpful having my colleague like sit in with me and go like, oh, slow down there, Bernadette. We should probably ask them how they're doing. How was their weekend? Wish them a happy new year, a happy Merry Christmas, because it just doesn't occur to me. Like it just blank.
I will say I'm probably twice the age of most of y'all. It does get a lot easier with that as you get older. It becomes kind of natural. I mean, I'd have to ask an FE user if I'm really coming across natural from their perspective, but from my perspective, it gets easier.
It depends on my mood, Sometimes I do care to know, but a lot of times it's like we don't have that much time. We have to do our thing. So I'll say it, but it's kind of like moving on, and let's do our thing. But it depends on the person too. Sometimes I really do care to know how they're doing. So it just depends.
I think with working on FI definitely helps with, as I like to say, like the fear of like the chemicals. It's like once you get more comfortable and like in hard places of emotion for yourself, or comfortable with the range of your personal emotions, then it can help relate to other people's emotional spectrum, and it doesn't feel as weird because you're more at peace with your own internal world of feelings. You don't feel like you have to rationalize everything. You can feel a certain way and not have to have a reason for it. And so I think that growth in the FI definitely helps in the FE. But at the same time, I've seen such proficient use of FE. And recently I was listening to a woman I work with who is a nurse, and she was talking about how, with some of these people who were going through a really hard stage of life, and they were, confused with certain elements of things that were going on where they were at, and they were getting really flustered, but really for no reason. But it was because no one was moving their state of emotion with having them feel secure with the transparency of things, with having them feel confident that they're in good hands. And so that element of moving the emotions of the humans based off of things like people need to feel secure, right? People need to feel confident in the hands that they're in. It's like, I see that as being so valuable, but that's not what my FI is doing. My FI is like, am I secure? Am I confident in what I'm doing? Yep, I'm good to go. And it's going forward, right? But I think that's the valuable part of FE, is looking at like, what did these, humans need right now to be at peace with their own selves? And that's not what TE is like. Is it working for you? Does like the thing over there work? Okay, you're good, but I could really see, and she basically, in this kind of chaotic situation, she was a person who was able to save the day essentially, because she was able to shift all these people who were feeling upset because they weren't communicated to on an emotional level, to have them feel confident basically in their surroundings. And I was like, wow, like that is the power of that function. And I just have a lot of respect for it, even though it's not mine.
Mm-hmm. That was really well put. And so INTJ children, how were you like as a child, and how would someone be able to spot an INTJ child?
Well, I was really quiet. I don't know, probably in my head a lot.
I know for me, it's funny when you said how to spot one, my immediate thought was you don't, because when I was younger, I was always hidden, always in my room, always trying to be away from people. And, not necessarily antisocial, because I did have a small group of friends from school that I would hang out with, but, I wouldn't branch out past that. I always had a really difficult time making friends in unfamiliar settings. And that was a big struggle when I was younger, because I didn't know how to approach someone. And I also didn't necessarily want to either. So not a very good combination at a young age. But as I grew older, I did end up, being able to kind of tap into FI more and be a little bit better about socializing with intent rather than waiting for it to happen. But I think that took a while for me to learn. And throughout my childhood, I was mostly pretty reserved and to myself, and reading and kind of just trying to avoid people most of the time.
I'll just add on to what I said a second ago. I do think, being very reserved is true, but I always had one or two best friends, at least one best friend every year in school. And I don't know, it just happened. Usually they're probably like ENFPs or something. But I was also pretty active in the sense that I was in sports and things, or band, or I was always, I think that might be my TE. I always wanted to be active in something, or maybe my parents instilled that in me or something. I don't really know where that came from. But it was more like goal oriented. So I would do things, and that was my way of being sort of semi-social. Otherwise, I was pretty reserved and to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was like younger, it was more like pretty much what everybody else said, like quiet to myself, and didn't want to interact with people much unless it was something that interested me. And I think coming into like middle school and high school, I was very involved, but it always felt like people knew me, but they didn't really know me. They were like, oh, this girl, like she does so many things, but like we don't really know her. She doesn't like hang out with us all the time. Or like it was kind of this like mysterious presence where I'm there, but it's like you don't really know what my business is or who I truly am.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the INTJ writing style adds to the mysteriousness of the type, because it's like maybe like I'll be communicating with you, but all I know is the to the pointness, but I don't really learn anything about you, and I leave thinking you're still a mystery, because that's how I felt communicating with y'all.
I was kind of like a tomboy, and just kind of into my own investigations. I would be in my room a lot and just reading whatever I was into. It wasn't generally what most people were into. Like, you know, I'd get invited to like a slumber party, but I never cared to do that. And so I wouldn't go because, you know, I'd say, you know, what are you guys going to do there? It's like, we're going to do makeovers. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not interested. You know, it's just thanks, but no, I'm not going to go. And just kind of, yeah, I had to ask my parents. It's like, what was I like? I mean, all I remember is when I was really little, I'd be in my room. They're like, yeah, you were in your room. You were reading a lot and you were just kind of in your own world. And another thing I remember was I either got along with really people who were much older than me or much younger. So like I'd hang out with like the grandparents or the great aunts or something, or like anybody who was much older. And I would just sit there for hours with them and like take in their information. And I really enjoyed talking to them. And then also like if I were a little older, I'd like playing with the little kids and like arrange a game for them. But it was weird because I didn't know what to do with people that you know, in my age range. So I just remember that as a thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think like someone had mentioned it before, but kind of the inability to know how to play with younger kids, like, or kids my own age, was an inhibitor from having those friendships. And I was always very okay on my own, doing my own thing. But I think the times when I did try to like, you know, be like, hey, what are you guys doing? It's like, I either didn't understand why they played the way that they did, or they didn't understand what the heck I was doing on the other side. And so there was this lack of understanding from both parties. It's like, why are you playing with the ball? I'm over here trying to like shift reality with my mind for like, you know, a few hours. And it's just like, why are you just I'm just sitting over there and these kids are like running around, you know? And so I was always kind of on that end, but in my childhood mind, it's like, I was doing the most interesting thing. I'm like, if I think hard enough about this, I can shift reality and levitate, you know? And like my first injury was in kindergarten, like literally trying to do that. And like the teacher calls up my mom. She's like, I don't know what happened to your daughter. She's covered in blood, you know? And it's just like, I'm trying to shift reality right now. I don't know about you guys. And then, so there was just like this like lack of connection with, okay, what are other kids doing in kindergarten, you know? And so that kind of thing I think would like progress. And then also the simplicity that I was okay with. Like I never needed like the new toy or the new thing or whatever. I had a brown lawnmower box that my parents got a lawnmower in my room as like that was my toy for and it's like, you know, we didn't grow up in hard circumstances or anything like that. It's just like, I love that box. And like, I would be in that box every single day, you know? And so again, unrelatable to other kids my age is because it's like, they wanted to like play with the Barbies and like, you know, do the other stuff. And I'm just like, you want to come in this world because this is where it's at. And it just wasn't on the same wavelength, but that was okay. I was also very okay with the fact that they didn't want to play in the box and I would be there alone, and that was okay.
I think on that note, like the one word that kept on being used to like that I could see myself as a child, right? This question was kind of difficult because to be frank, I don't remember a lot of my childhood. But I was always told to be someone who was very independent. Like I think it's like I saw very quickly that, you know, it's like I had interests that didn't necessarily like, it wasn't very widespread at times. So I saw it as like, okay, if I want to get this done, I'm going to get it done by myself. If someone wants to join, that's okay. If they don't want to join, I'm okay doing it by myself too. You know, so it's like, yeah, I would do a lot of things by myself. Actually, it was kind of funny because until recently, I didn't realize that I was fairly reserved. I thought that I was fairly social. Oh boy. I thought that I was fairly social and like easy to get along with, easy to get together with, because I had like quite a big group of friends that I still keep in contact with. Like I have 5 close friends from like high school. Until very recently, we were talking about like, what do you remember about each other, right? And all of them said, you would be really polite in school and we knew that you could do work, but then whenever we were like, hey, can we come over to your house to play with you, to be like, no, I need my alone time. And then I was like, oh yes, I do that. And then I realized that I had never invited any of my friends over to my house. That was when it finally hit me that maybe I am reserved.
Andria?
Yeah, I definitely have similar experiences. Very much a loner. I read a lot of books. That was like my main hobby. I started doing my own research pretty early on, so I'd go to the library and just get stacks of books. And I don't know, I enjoyed like sports and athletics and stuff like that, but it was very much, you know, task oriented, like, guys, we're gonna win or we're not gonna do this. And I do remember, you know how your teachers would like write things about you on your report cards sometimes. And I do remember one year in elementary school, one of my teachers did say that I had like leadership qualities, but that I was just uninterested in actual leadership. And I always remembered that because that is kind of how it goes. Like, I know I could take charge or that I could try mobilizing people, but I just never had any interest. And I would rather do, you know, my own thing. So that is unfortunately still true.
That is such a TE comment on a report card. Like, hey, I noticed your TE. That's what your school teachers were trying to tell you.
I think it's interesting that we all kind of had this experience where we're reserved, we like to do our own thing, and it was totally fine. Like, my stepmom is a ESFJ, and she would try to get me to go to parties. I think she worried that, you know, I was unhappy or something. But I was really happy doing my own thing by myself. You know, it's just, and I see all of you guys are like that. Even when we're children, you know, we can just be happy reading a book, you know? Or like for me, I was exploring outside, going and getting the frogs out of the gutter and like trying to feed them a fly, or, you know, just trying to explore with nature and stuff. That's when I was really young, like second grade.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't need anyone else around for that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent answers, everyone. And so how do you think female INTJs differ from their male INTJ counterparts?
I think the one that like sticks out to me, I think males sometimes get away with having a very like abrasive T, where we as female are constantly, because we're usually surrounded by other females who are usually more FE oriented. They were like, we have to learn to temper our T, be like, okay, maybe if I phrase this way, it'll be like more receptive, or like, yeah, like I want to be direct, but I don't want to come off as rude. And like, it's way more often that a female gets labeled as that. So I think that's probably the thing that sticks out to me the most. They kind of get away with the stereotypes more often than we do.
Yeah, 100%. The INTJs, I know a female and two males in my community, and one of the males is much older. He's in his 60s and he's very mellow now, but the other guy, he's a little young. He's probably 10 years younger than me, so he's probably in his early 40s now. But he can totally just come off matter of fact. His TE is very blunt. I mean, he can kid around too, so he's not rude or anything, but he definitely gets away with being more TE abrasive than a female would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of ticks me off, because it's that whole thing where women, if they're in business, if they're firm or assertive, they come across as a BI, you know, I don't know if we're allowed to cuss or anything, but they come across as a bad word, whereas the men are considered the show of strength or leadership. Reminds me of that.
Yeah, and this makes male TJs easier to type because their TE, like, they never had to soften it socially, whereas like with female TJs, you might have a moment of confusion, like, is this person a TJ? Are they an FJ? Because they had to learn that social skill. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would probably be like one of the more apparent differences between a male versus like a female INTJ. I know for a fact that like growing up, I was scolded a lot for being too direct with what I wanted. Like because I always knew what I was going after. So it was very easy when someone was like asking, what do you want, right? I would always go, oh, I'm going after this. And then I would get, maybe it's like pretty unique to my culture, but a lot of like my grandma used to say like, oh, females are supposed to be gentle and soft-spoken and demure and calm. You're not supposed to state what you want very outwardly. And that was a big kind of like, it was a big confusion for me, because I was like, yeah, but that's not really me though. So, you know, like I don't relate to that being like not knowing what I want. It was always very much like, even if I didn't state it, I knew what I was going after.
You know, on the flip side of that, I was thinking as women INTJs, we probably have a little bit easier time learning how to grow our FI because we are surrounded by more examples of that and are encouraged to do so, as well as FE. So that's probably another difference. I only know one other INTJ, my uncle, and we're actually very similar. So, but that was one thing that I think I learned that a little bit earlier than he did because of that. And because, you know, he had an easier time letting his TE take over where he didn't really have to tap into that.
Mm-hmm. There's more adaptation with the female INTJs generally.
I guess I'll just like add on that kind of what everyone's saying to the same point. But I think I realized early on that there were these kind of like social expectations as a female that like to kind of show some response or to be more emotionally interactive or to show or to be able to at least put on that face was in some ways like, and in some circumstances more expected. Like I remember, for example, my grandfather asking me like over and over again, like, why don't you cheer up, kid? You know, why don't you tell us what's going on? Like trying to like get that kind of like FE expression from me. And I just like wasn't buying in, you know? And I was just like, I don't have anything to talk about that's relevant. I don't have any influx of emotion in either way. You know, I'm not sad, but I'm not like overly happy either. I'm just kind of neutral. And like that just wasn't an acceptable answer. And the thing is like I realized it created this pattern of like, now we have to perpetuate on this conversation of why I'm not being reactive because of the fact I'm not being reactive. And then because of that, I didn't want that to occur more. So I was like, well, if I have to like put on a good face or like show up or turn on in a certain way, in order to prevent having this stupid conversation again, I can do that, you know? And though it's not as authentic to like who I am in the moment, to me, it's like, I'd rather turn that on and then skip the chaos of this stupid conversation that we're going to end up having than have to have that conversation. And so that's, I think, where at least from the like the female side, I was like, I can learn to be adaptive that way just to override what would happen as the repercussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I had similar experiences like that in my interactions with my grandmother and my grandfather. Whenever they used to ask me like, how are you? I would generally reply with like, okay, fairly okay, right? Because that was what was most reflective of how I was actually feeling, which was just like baseline neutral. You know, it's not too much. It's not sad either. It's just okay, right? And they would always interpret that as like, oh, something's wrong, right? And that wasn't the case at all. It was just what was reflective of how I was actually feeling. So, and initially I would always find it strange. I would talk about it with my dad. I was like, why does grandma always think that I'm not okay when I'm okay, right? Like, I'm just fine. You know, it's like, everything's okay. Like, it's generally okay. And then my dad had to like explain to me like, oh, she probably wants you to smile more, to be more like uplifting in your tone. And just to avoid that, because I saw it happening so many times, I was like, okay, now whenever she responds to me, I'll perk up and kind of go like, yep, I'm great. Because that avoids the whole like, oh, something's wrong with you, something's not okay. Just to avoid that.
Exactly that.
Yeah, I relate to that quite a bit. And I think there's another side of it where it's like if someone's upset and they come to you to be consoled, and like for me, it was like I would open with you, okay, what's the problem? Tell me what's going on. Let me help you solve it. Let's see what we can do about it. And they're like, you didn't even ask me like how am I feeling, or like you didn't pay attention to the emotion at all. It's more about like, okay, if this is a problem, let's solve it, like, which is a T response, right? And I'm like, oh, I had to like tone that back down, be like, okay, what's going on? And let them open up, be like, okay, do you need emotional support, or more like, do you want an actual solution? I think that's something I had to learn too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel very lucky because I had access. We all have access to a lot of books on psychology. So at a young age, I was reading about all of that, how to relate to people socially. So I was able to pick up those skills, but it wasn't natural. I don't think I would have figured it out on my own, probably until I got much older, maybe. But like you said, when someone's upset, just ask them to tell you how they feel and let them talk. Versus we naturally want to just solve the problem for them, But I also want to say, I agree with LiJo and Bernadette, and probably the rest of you have this maybe, but I had that experience so many times when I was younger where they would say, smile, or what's wrong? Oh God, I hated that. It was just like, leave me alone. I'm fine. Like I was great until you asked me that. And now I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
It kind of creates a tension where there didn't need to be one. It's like it's like they're judging you and you were fine, and all of a sudden they're saying there's something wrong with you. So I also had to learn to just pretend, like I'm feeling good on the inside. Like I could be really happy, but I have to like try to figure out how to make my face show that when I come around certain people, just so I don't have to deal with them questioning me.
Yeah. I have a lot of FI users tell me that, Holly, where they won't show their genuine emotion on their face. And what will happen? Well, people will go like, are you angry or something? Like, and then now I wasn't, but now I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my interaction with my ISFJ friend, I think for her, she needs that emotion to be emoted externally for her to register it. Meanwhile, for me, when I'm simply saying I'm okay, as opposed to like, I'm great with like a perked up attitude, it's just because I'm okay is the most reflective and indicative of how I'm actually feeling, So it's like, I used to ask her this question, like, why do you assume when I'm saying I'm okay that automatically defaults to I'm not okay? I'm okay is a state. It's not 1-0, right? It's not you're great, you're bad, So it's like, it's not in the absence of saying you're great, you must be bad. It could be like, okay, baseline, okay.
What did she say when you asked her? Did she ever give you an answer that made sense? Or
I think actually like that was probably like the biggest catalyst for growth, in which like when I finally asked her that, she was like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense, because I drew it out to her with a chart. I was like, look, okay, there's different states here in the middle. You can't equate emotions to 1-0, right? Like 1 being I'm great, 0 being I'm terrible, right? You can't immediately assume that just because I'm not saying I'm great means that I'm horribly depressed.
Yeah.
There's variations of emotions in the middle of those, and I generally fall within that spectrum, which I consider to be okay. And she was like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense, So like that's how I think that's the foundation of like why our friendship has lasted all this time, is because it's like she communicates to me when she's like, okay, well, I'm registering that you're not feeling okay because you're not lighting up and like you're answering really short, you're not necessarily smiling. And I explained to her like this whole using a chart, this is the range of emotions, and I'm over here, and that means that I'm okay. When I'm stating like something that I had to get across to her very frequently was, what I'm stating is just that. It's not I'm implying that when I'm just saying I'm okay, that I'm actually not okay. It just means that I'm okay. Likewise for her, she says sometimes she doesn't like stating when she's not feeling okay, because she's like, what if it spoils the mood of the conversation? I don't want that. So I have to understand from her flip side that sometimes when she's going, I'm okay, with a slight change in the tone and it's a bit shorter, that maybe I should inquire to that a bit more, as opposed to assuming that it just means that she's okay.
Yeah. That is so true. It's normally said that females will kind of play an emotional game, like they'll say one thing but really mean another. But it seems like Bernadette, like what she really says is what she really means.
Can I put a point here from my conversation with my ISFJ friend? I don't necessarily see it as a game. Like my perspective in that has changed, in which like with FI, because it's internal, I've had the time to figure it out. So I know very clearly what I'm feeling. So when I state it, it's exactly based off of that. I know how I'm feeling. Meanwhile, in her case, sometimes she goes, I'm okay, but she actually wants to talk it out because she's not necessarily clear how she feels. So she wants to ping it back and forth with me so she can go, oh, okay, I understand based off of this conversation with you, based off of talking out my feelings, what I'm actually feeling.
That is 100% why I would say that. Yeah, as an FE user. So spot on, Bernadette.
Yeah, and you were talking about you're in the range of okay when you say okay. And I wonder if FI users have more of nuanced levels of feelings. Like we have much more variety of feelings, maybe, I don't know, than FE users. So we might see that we're in this range where they just kind of skip a general range. They might just like have general ranges, whereas we can see that we're in a more of a gray area. And so I don't know how to really describe that, but maybe there's a miscommunication there as well.
Yeah, and I think with FI, what happens if I'm not okay, I will usually not be hanging out with people or spending time with them. I would need time to like process myself before like if I meet up with people, I'm okay at that point. And I think this is another stereotype with INTJs that I've noticed. It's like we can be very angry or revengeful, but speaking to other INTJs and you guys, I think we're about most things, we're just neutral. We don't have strong feelings. Like there are a few things we really care about, but for most things, we're just like, it's like, we don't really care. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I like to say neutral state is my natural state, where for the most part, in general, my emotional reactions are typically really delayed. And that's also part of just, processing what's actually happening. And then, okay, now how did I feel about it? But so for the most part, when I am dealing with different situations or people or whatever it is in my day to day, I'm not thinking of how do I feel about this or emoting that, that's the last thing on my mind. And so, I think for FI, it is very internal. Like it's not something that is presented outwardly or considered in that moment, unless you're reflecting on your values or something to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, do people ever infer incorrectly about how you're feeling off of your face? Like, do people think you're more...
All the time.
Yeah. That's the whole thing of why aren't you smiling? Are you upset?
Mm-hmm.
Fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think people, we are pretty... I think INTJs tend to be pretty strong introverts, the stronger of some of the other introverts. And I think maybe some people just think that just the fact that you're quiet is a bad thing. Whereas they don't really realize that, no, we're probably really happy in our head. Like being in our head is a happy place. So don't think that just because we're kind of reserved that it's a bad thing or that we're experiencing any negative feelings or, experiences.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I have to explain that because I am so happy in my head. I really am never bored. I can only think of one time that I was bored, and it was like years ago. And there was like a meeting we had to have where people were talking about logistical things that we were going to need, and it was going on for like a half an hour, and then like then I was just a friend of mine was like, you can go, because it's like I couldn't stand it. I was so like, and I had to be present because I had to answer the questions. So it was just really, I don't like those kinds of situations where we're just talking about something so mundane and it's going on for periods at a time. Like, oh my gosh. But in my head is the best place to be. I feel like just leave me alone. I'll be fine. I'm not unhappy. I'm okay, and I'm actually great right there. I don't want to move. If I could stay there longer. Totally.
They say, INFPs have their inner world. And I've often wondered, maybe I'm INFP because of that, but you know, I know it's not, because theirs is much more fantastical and emotional, I think. But I definitely think we have a inner world that's really nice. So.
Well, I think the inner world for me is a lot more exciting. My outside, I think from the outside, people might see me as pretty vanilla and just kind and like laid back. But my inside is like extremely intense and very fiery. And it's just the best. I mean, I really enjoy being in there and just exploring in my mind, you know, just heaven.
I think this used to be a hypothetical thing that I also was trying to explain to my friend, right? Like when she was telling me like, oh, sometimes you seem very removed from reality, right? And then I would always tell her like, in the way that I often do this thing where there's the self here, but there's the self that's observing the self, right? And then I often say like, why do we necessarily always value physical reality to be the more superior reality? That's not necessarily the case. In my mind, there's a very clear alternate reality that's going on here that I'm envisioning very strongly. And that feels to me as real as what's going on around, you know? So it's like, yeah, like I think I took her on a philosophical tangent that night, but I was trying to explain the way that my mind worked, in which it's like, there was this world that I could see. It's not this physical world, but it feels as real as that to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember in high school, there was a specific time when I had this aha moment that, wow, everybody else isn't in their head. I remember thinking, and now I know it's SE, but everybody was so in the moment and present. And I just thought that everyone was in their head like I was. And then in high school, I realized, wow, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, whoa, I have been completely removed from this whole, the way that people are. It was just really shocking. Well, I remember saying, you mean you're actually like paying attention to what's in front of you all the time? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, wow, that's wild. I mean, we had this whole conversation with one of my friends. It was so cool. But then I felt kind of weird, like, wow, what's wrong with me? Like, why haven't I ever been that present, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, being present has been something that takes conscious effort. It's been something that I've been trying to focus on, in which it was kind of strange, but I realized this going on when I was in a meeting with someone, right? Like they were talking and, okay, the span of what they're saying might be 1 minute, say. Within the first 20 seconds, I was already going, I can see where they're going to go. Let me start answering that question. And then I realized in doing that I wasn't in the moment. So I have to like physically, like, it's why I practice meditation. I have to physically slow down my breath and recalibrate myself with the breath, which for me is kind of like the smallest unit of reality, to not constantly like ping back to this ether world where I'm like constantly retreating.
Yeah, because I noticed that as well, like in meetings or with colleagues at work. We do tend to jump. We think we know what they're going to say, and sometimes we're right, but sometimes we're wrong. And I learned by not predicting correctly, you know, more than once. So I learned to just shut up and let them completely finish what they're going to say, and then respond.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that led to greater, I think like on my end, greater empathy towards others. Instead of assuming what they're going to say, now I try to make sure that I'm actually there and present, listening to that full 1 minute of what they're saying, instead of preempting what they're going to say 20 seconds in. And then to make sure that happens, I have this fail-safe mechanism where at the end of what they're saying, I try to summarize what they're saying. And then I go, just to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly, is this what you're trying to get across? Until they say, yes, that's what I meant. Then I continue on.
And I think too, like Bernadette, when you kind of started this with like having the alternate reality, you know, and then there's like this other reality. I think that's kind of what translates to INTJs feeling that kind of displacement with the physical world, is because, like, you know, you're like, this other reality is just as real. And I think it's actually like, I think that's the most real. Like that's where we live. That's home base. That's NI. It's up there in the cloud. And that's where our brain is functioning in a default state all the time. And then what we have to do is we have to learn this translation process of like, how do I take this and bring it and make it real human talk? How do I take this, what's going on up here, and make it relatable to the others, you know? Or how do I make it a thing, whatever it is. And so we're constantly playing this translation game between the two. And, you know, that's why, you know, the social things, the people things, the reality things can be exhausting, because it's like we're constantly having to translate the brain side and bringing it down to the human side. And so, you know, I know that before I discovered type, I was like, why do I just like feel like an alien transplanted here on the planet, and I'm having to learn how to do the human thing, you know? And why does that seem like other people don't struggle with that the same way? And, you know, then when I got that greater understanding of realizing that that's just because I'm storing my information in a different place than people are, then I was like, okay, well, that makes it more relatable. Like other people are storing their information here on the ground level and they're accessing it right away. They can go back and forth, you know? I'm storing my information somewhere else. And so I have to have a longer jump to go get that information and bring it back down to reality. And that's why things often can seem different with certain dynamics between either people or with just interacting with things in real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as an introvert, you're constantly trying to switch in and out of your inner reality of that intuitive kind of landscape you created and actual reality, which is why INTJs get so tired, and they always talk about energy management, and they're like, gotta conserve that energy, figure out the best way to do this so I can conserve all of this precious energy.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with OP, but they talked about one time the energy management where they were saying people who have the animals, the one that sleep, they have sleep first. Like Dave will say that he'll have to sit when he goes to like Home Depot, he'll sit sit in the car before he goes in to like gather up his energy or just kind of relax for a minute. And yesterday I caught myself sitting in the parking lot at Target in my car, just like, okay, just gather my energy. And I wasn't like, there was no need for me to be tired. It wasn't like I had just worked out or something, you know, I was just going to the store. And I was like, okay, let me just sit here for a minute and gather my energy and relax, and then I'll go in. And so I totally started realizing I do that. It's so weird.
I saw it based off of like observing myself. It kind of feels like switching from that internal lens of like NIFI to TESE, because it's like what's draining, at least in my case, is having to adapt to situations as they come up and like the physical experiences. So that often translates to being very conscious towards energy management and having to take that like 15-second break, like often before I go into a meeting, where I'm like, I know that I can't preempt everything that's going to happen here. I have to take a breather and just go like, you can adapt. You can adapt. Yes, you can do this. And then I go in.
Yeah. What happens with NI at the top and SE at the bottom is that NI will try to preemptively guess what all the SE will, like all the ways that the SE could unfold. So nothing will be a surprise. So it'll be like, I don't have to adapt in the moment because I've planned out every route how this could go. So it's like an infallible NI plan. So you don't have to deal with the SE always changing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you guys do this when you're watching movies or something? You like predict the next thing that's going to happen in the movie. And if you're watching it with somebody else, they'll get really annoyed with you. Do you ever do that?
I do it like before, like I have to like present something, you know, so I have to do a lot of professional development. And so I kind of try to foresee what might happen and have like alternate scenarios or like contingency plans, right? And then it'll work out. And generally it falls within that domain where I don't go like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do here. And I really helps me with that.
I think on this point, this might be something that I've found valuable to learn and glean from the ENTJs, because I noticed that ENTJs are a lot more fluid and adaptive in the way that they apply their TE solutions. Meanwhile, like I can almost have this recoil reaction because I want to stay in that pondering kind of like simulating what's going to happen space, I end up thinking that I'm actually experiencing, but it's not. It's just that I'm simulating the experiences. So it's like I have to like consciously look towards the ENTJs and go, okay, maybe I need to actually gather real experiences, physical experiences from around me, instead of like thinking it through, preempting everything and substituting reality for whatever I'm simulating.
Yeah, I think this has been like, and sometimes it gets exhausting where you're just constantly in your head. And I wonder if it's like a blast, if you're a blast or sleep INTJ distinction, because I feel for me, as I've grown up, and it also might be due to the field I'm in, I've just slowly learned to be like, let's see how this goes with the information I have now. And if it fails, then I've learned a new, and it's like a constant work in progress where I'm like, it's like constantly refining your equations and your model with the new information that's coming in. And I'm trying to create a better like T system. So it's like learning from the SE going around. Cause I remember doing this, like trying to plan out as much as I can ahead when I was younger. But then I was like, I can't control the sensory chaos as much as I would like to predict it and be in charge of it. I can't. So I just have to learn to be able to like improvise better.
Excellent thoughts, everyone. Really cool conversation. And so I'm wondering, what is everyone's experience with NI?
We kind of just spoke about that in a way where we're kind of preempting what we think is going to happen, so plan ahead and sort of so we're ready to handle the SC chaos. I think that's a big part of it. I will replay conversations in my, not replay past conversations, but predicting conversations, planning ahead. You know, like you do when you're going to give a speech in school. I do that constantly for everything.
Yeah.
I notice a lot of people catching me using NI because I do stare off into space a lot. I'm kind of a dreamer, so it's constant. I do like to just look out the window. I have this beautiful field and like mountain range behind, right outside the house, and I just like to dream. I just like stare out, and I could be staring out for a long time. But often, my family or my kids are like, "Mommy," and then I have to like snap into the present. It happens everywhere, though. I do drift into thinking mode, NI mode, and it's just, I hate this word, but it's the word that comes up is delicious. It just feels really good to be there. Yeah, I hate that word.
I think in an experience that I'm not sure if this is NI, but I'm going to just give it a shot, was something that I experienced quite acutely is this sensation, almost like when I'm learning something, it's like I'm peeling back the sensory layers, like I'm peeling it back up until the very fundamental core of it. And that's what I store in my head. So for example, for me, when I was studying economics, I would peel back graphs, right, and understand it from the fundamentals. So in my head, I wasn't storing it as supply graphs, demand graphs, equilibrium. I was storing it as the patterns that I saw within that. So it's like, it would often come up like in test, right? Like whenever I would get, like a teacher would ask a question that wasn't, verbatim from the book we hadn't covered, I would extrapolate from that pattern to be like, oh, this is most likely going to be the answer. And at first they thought that I was cheating, but for me, it's like, it's not that case. It's for me because it's like, I'm not storing the sensory supply demand diagrams. I'm peeling it back to like the very, very base core, whatever it is.
You're understanding the actual concept and principles underlying it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to touch on too, is like prioritizing the concepts over anything else, because it's like that's our way to shortcut our way to whatever it is faster, right? Mm-hmm. So, to us, when we look at the sensory, we're looking at all this stuff, right? All of these things. It's like, oh, I have to, touch this singular thing, and everything is so separated. And we're like, what is the unifying factor that allows me to get whatever this is and like move through it, right? To mm-hmm. use it to wherever I have to go and not have to deal with this stuff, right? And so just like Bernadette was saying with like the graphs, like I remember in, I think it was like 10th grade or something like that, really understanding the principle of like Latin roots of words. And then all of a sudden being like, I can basically get through any kind of vocabulary test now. Like I can, and I did. And it's like all of a sudden I went from being okay in vocabulary and feeling like I had to memorize words and their definitions and, doing the singular, right? The SE on each one, very draining process, until like when I really started putting together like Latin roots. I'm like, okay, so by understanding this, I can just fake my understanding of all these other pieces because I understand the core of what they're made up from. And so I think that is an illustration of what NI is trying to do all the time. It's shortcutting its way in the sensory, but to bring everything together as a whole.
Yeah, that unifying pattern. Yeah, totally, LiJo and Bernadette.
Yeah, it's very much the same for me. So for me, it's like looking at something and extracting the general principles or the patterns. So like if I plug in one thing, I can predict the chain of events that's going to follow and the outcomes that's going to come out of it. That's how I see it. And I think it's all also like if it's something I care about, it's also constantly being updated with new information that's coming in from my SET or TE. It's always something that's like the plan or the patterns constantly being updated. It's not a static state. This is the pattern, but the pattern itself is always like, okay, this is now, but like new information comes in and we're like update. So these are the new information. So that means there's this nuance to this pattern. That's also something that NI does.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I love you guys. It's so cool to see a bunch of INTJ females around. It's nice. We all relate. It seems like we're very similar in all these ways. I have one anecdote about NI. This was years ago, an ex and I were at the table eating dinner. We were in a restaurant, and she said to me, she went like this, and it was just the two of us having dinner. We were talking, and all of a sudden she waved her hand in front of my face like, hello, are you there? And I had stopped with my fork in front of my mouth and just was sitting there. And I had no idea I was doing that. She says, you do that kind of a lot. Not a lot, but it's not the first time. So ever since then, I'm like really conscientious about that.
Yeah, apparently I have a very obvious thinking face. Whenever I'm receiving something, I have to conjure up the image. So it's like I obviously just look up and just kind of space out for a bit because I'm pinging the ether.
Love that. And Andria and Ashleigh?
Yeah, I also would define NI pretty much as looking for the essence of things and extrapolating out of that patterns and stuff like that. I guess one way I would expand it perhaps is I spend a lot of time, my background is in humanities, but even so, just thinking about people and how like other people's minds are working or trying to figure out what they're thinking. I just spend a lot of time like wading through different perspectives and trying to, pull them all together and find what the narrative is, what like the true narrative is. And then, going from there with predictions into the future, but like what is really happening, taking the SP and trying to, like you're saying, strip it away and find what is really happening here. And then what does that say about, where we're going?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To strip away the details to get to the concept, like the core concept.
Yeah, I've had very similar experience with NI, pattern recognition, predictability, simulations. A lot of it is kind of unconsciously absorbing all of this information, and sometimes consciously as well, to then utilize that known information to better predict and understand what's going on, whether it's past, present, or future, although it's typically more past or future oriented for me. So a lot of it is, like Andrea said, perspective shifting, I think is what I use it for the most, but I'm also in like a psychology field. So that helps me, as well as tapping into FI a little bit to perspective shifts with people, but also with concepts and stances and, whatever it is that it may be. And even though it's kind of this unconscious process, it's also something I can now, not so much in my younger days, but tap into and utilize as a tool to help me expand my thinking or see the bigger picture or predict what's going to be happening, predict an outcome, a conversation, what a person's response might be, what they might be thinking, things like that. Kind of deep dive into these different areas.
Yeah. Totally, Ashleigh. It's like known patterns you use to project how it will play out throughout time. Yeah. And Andria, essence is a really good word to ascribe to NI, like looking for that essence to that core that everyone seems to be describing. Yeah. And so everyone's experience with TE, extroverted thinking.
Well, for me, it's just planning, writing out how I just finished planning out my upcoming year. And, I have set a goal to create a YouTube channel and hopefully by the end of it have some kind of income coming in, which is apparently a hard goal to reach. And so I, planned out, you're not going to reach a goal unless you have your SOPs, your standard operating procedures in place to reach that goal. So I've been breaking those down into what I need to do whatever day of the week, every week. So that would be an example of TE for me right now.
I think in my end, there's probably two things that I suspect to be like a TE thing, which is like the first one, viewing. I just realized this recently, but viewing things as a resource constraint problem. So it's like, okay, with the resources that I have, how do I manage and prioritize what needs to get if I'm trying to get into trading, do I prioritize getting a laptop more with the amount that I have, or do I prioritize what do I need to do, right? Like viewing things as a resource constraint problem is definitely something that I see I do a lot. The second, in terms of communication, interpreting things in terms of action items. So an example that happened recently was I was talking with my INFJ friend, and he was upset about the fact that he wouldn't be able to talk with me as frequently. So he was saying like, oh, now my work schedules have shifted. I can't talk with you as frequently. I'm so sad. Like, this is upsetting for me, right? And my response immediately was, well, what days don't you work? And then he was like, Sunday. And I was like, cool, we can talk on Sundays then. See you then. So it's like seeing things in terms of like, what's the next available action item from that?
That was really well put, Bernadette.
Exactly as what Holly and Bernadette said. So in terms of it's like prioritizing, and I think it's also what I appreciate the most. It's like he's always like, oh, but is this gonna really work in the real world? Which I really appreciate, because, and I can sometimes go too deep into theorizing and be like, oh, this is the pattern, but okay, does this pattern actually work in the real world? So T wants to apply things and make use of it to see if it's actually true. And I appreciate T always coming in and being like, okay, yeah, this is working. Let's continue on this. Or sometimes it doesn't work. Be like, oh no, we need to change this. What's the appropriate course of action to change this thing? And I kind of also think this is how I connect with people too, because it's especially the anecdote that Bernadette just used. Oh, it's like, oh, I can help you this way. So this is the best way we can connect with people. It's like setting things up for them or helping them plan ahead. So I think this is how I connect with people too.
Yeah. People tend to think only FE is the one to help, but TE helps a lot. Yeah. By helping you make things work, like everyone was saying. Yeah.
I think the way that I view the TE and FI interaction is that compared to an FE user it's less direct. It's kind of more indirect. So an experience that happened when I was younger, my mom runs a hotel and she was saying oh, I'm really stressed out. I can't seem to get it right with the staffing, with, determining prices, with high and low seasons, making sure that I'm marketing to the right types of geography. And I registered in my head that, oh, she's upset. It's I know and understand that emotionally she's upset. But I didn't feel comfortable just going I hope you feel better, and offering her a hug. Instead, I was kind of okay, I traced back what was causing her to feel upset, which was not being able to manage the hotel, created a standard operating procedure for her, explained to her oh, these are why you should do these things. This is how you're going to determine pricing. This is how you're going to determine who you're going to target in terms of your advertising spend. And this is why it's going to work, right? And then I explained that to her in the hopes of solving the problem that made her sad. So she had the space to deal with her emotions herself. I didn't feel comfortable changing how she felt by making her feel comfortable. So I tried to resolve what was causing her to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, here's the difference between TE and FE. So TE will try to transform your situation by like improving your situation functionally, whereas FE will directly try to impact your mood in some way. So it'll try to transform your mood directly. So that's a little bit of the difference. Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you about that, Joyce. To me, what Bernadette is describing is I relate to doing that as well, probably way more than people want. But to me, I feel like that's going to the root of what's causing the problem. But maybe we got it backwards. Is the root of the problem just needing to talk, like just needing that emotional? You're saying that's more direct.
Oh, both ways are direct. So it's either you're directly dealing with the situation with TE, or you're dealing with people's emotions directly, which is FE. Both have their ups and downs, because sometimes people like the reason why FE users see it as like important to lift your emotions is because they see it as most effective when you are able to ping back and forth and to really sort it out externally. Whereas FI has an automatic assumption that sometimes your emotions might be better solved in your own processing time. So helping you with your situation will give you the most bang for your buck. So both of these types have a different understanding of what gives the greatest leverage in that situation. Yeah.
I think that until just now, I think that I automatically just assumed that was the superior way, is just solve the problem at the root of it. But I think you have a really good point, because sometimes someone just needs to feel better and then they can function better. But I think in Bernadette's scenario, it probably really was, the root problem really was she needed someone to help her with an SOP. I guess it depends on the scenario.
Yeah, I think that was also like, Joyce, what you said about like directness. That was how I was finally able to conceptualize what FE was. Because for me, I could see it like, okay, TE and FE are both direct, but the aim of both is different. Like for me, I saw creating my mom an SOP for her hotel as direct and long-term efficient, because I was like, oh, this is a recurring problem. She's told me that this upset her many times. So if I solve the root, that's never going to be a recurring issue again. So she has the space to deal and process with her emotions by herself.
Mm-hmm.
Is she an FE user? Does she want to deal with them by herself, or does she want to ping them off of y'all or somebody?
I suspect that she might be an ISTJ, just because like she and I generally, we understand each other in that way. Like she understands that gesture and she's able to be like, okay, I understand what you're doing there. I appreciate it. And we just silently nod at each other.
I think with how I see it is usually TE is kind of how like it's interpreted. T prefers to solve problems, but keeps it impersonal, where it's like, oh, I'm not gonna take on your emotions, but I'm gonna like help you, but like not gonna take. Where FE is like more personal and actually like emotes with the person, be like, okay, let me feel those things to like make the situation lighter for you.
Yes, I 100% agree. Rodella, I would add a caveat to it. So I think some INTJs, they learn to raise the morale of people, but they realize that they don't need it themselves. So they learn how to do the fake FE, but they realize they don't need that reaffirmation themselves. So that's an interesting thing too. And so Ashleigh, Andria, your thoughts on TE?
For me, the TE is similar to what you guys are saying, problem solving, troubleshooting. But I notice it the most when someone comes to me with an issue. I immediately remove myself from what they're telling me. So I'm not reacting. I'm giving them the space to share what they want to share without having to deal with my own reaction. And to me, that's probably because that's what I prefer as well. And an FE user might not see it in that way. But for me, it's like giving them the space. And then I come in trying to solve the issue itself so that they can, have some options to choose from or figure out what they want to do. So it's kind of like the way I utilize it for others is more in service to help them have space and independence to better deal with the problem, not necessarily to make them feel better. But, in the end, if I am able to help them, then theoretically that will help them feel better. And I have gotten a little bit better at acknowledging the emotional aspect of it too as time has gone on. But one instance that comes to mind is with my ISFP partner. Sometimes he's just upset, or he's, just frustrated with something or sad about something. And I come in trying to say, okay, well, if I change this and this and this, or if you do this, this and this, or X, Y, Z, that could help, blah, blah, blah. But, it's taken him telling me it quite a few times, but he's like, sometimes that's just how I feel, and that's okay. Like, I'm just feeling. And I'm like, what? You're just feeling and you don't want to do anything about it? But, so that's kind of where my TE hits a wall with some things, and it's, work in progress with that. But that's kind of like a glaring instance of my TE kind of popping out and not really recognizing the nuances or the ability to just sit with the feeling without trying to resolve it or troubleshoot or make things efficient in the future. And, for me, as soon as I have an issue, it's just how am I solving it right now, but how am I going to prevent it from happening again? So that's kind of automatically where my mind goes with most things. And that's kind of where I see it showing up the most.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I guess one thing that it seems in the type community a lot, TE is definitely correlated with action, which is totally true. But yeah, you do kind of not notice just how embedded it is into your perspective and just how you look at everything and how you analyze things. And yeah, I can definitely think of times when I've tried to do things with feelers or with FJs specifically where I was just very much like, okay, we just need to do this. This is what we're going to do. And like not at all concerned about, the atmosphere or whatever. And then afterwards finding they were upset because they wanted to feel like we were doing it together, and it was more about we need to feel like we're on the same team more than actually doing the thing. And that just like blew my mind because I don't care if we're doing it together as long as we just get it done, that type of thing. So there definitely have been instances where that came off wrong to feelers specifically. But I also want to say that when I think of TE, I typically think of energy, because when you're an introvert and you spend so much time in your head, what I find is that if I spend too much time in NI or just in my introverted functions and not really doing things, I very easily start losing an accurate metric for energy management. And so I start thinking that all of the externalized things that I have to do, all the TESE, suddenly seems like it's so much bigger than it actually is. It's going to take so much more energy to do these simple tasks. Whereas when I am, doing a healthy amount of TE and continuing that, then I have a much more balanced and accurate metric for determining how much energy things are going to take. And so I actually tend to have more energy, or I think that I have more energy when I'm actually extroverting in some way, because it is a much more balanced way of existing. So I definitely correlate TE with energy.
Yeah, and another thing I think about with TE is, at least for the INTJ, is it's in our second slot, which is your good parent or your tool function. So it means you're going to use that whenever you want to help. So it's just, TE as an ENTJ is going to be different than for an INTJ. So like at work, for example, I work with an ISTJ programmer, and the two of us are just so great at solving problems together in a collaborative way, because we both have TE in that second slot. And so it's really fun. Everybody else we work with is a TI user. So he and I just kind of have each other to bounce things off. But also I found that it helps me a lot with doing training, teaching people, training people, and then kind of keeping the meetings. Sometimes I'm actually really good in meetings, helping people understand what other people are trying to say, and kind of building that understanding among the group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, with the facilitating meetings. I think I use it there to keep us moving forward. Use it kind of in a gentle way, just kind of like addressing whatever is happening here, and then, okay, let's move on to the next part now that we've, fixed this. Let's move on, and it's kind of gentle, but it's definitely an organizing function for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also like what someone said about how it's detached emotionally. So like it's not personal. I don't take things personal. People can say anything in a meeting and I'm not going to usually take it personally if it's thinking related, and I can just step back and just analyze what to say next and not get upset. Whereas other people, like after the meeting, you'll hear, did you hear so and so how they said that? And they're, they've gotten up into their FE and they're just like upset, and everyone's talking about this gossipy thing and I just didn't even catch it, and everything was fine as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot, which is why it's like when I used to do debate, right? Like it would be I used to tell my friends, like, just because I disagree with you doesn't mean that I dislike you. Like I see debating as kind of like disagreeing with, the validity of this thought premise. It's not necessarily I'm attacking you as a person, right? So if I'm saying like, hey, that doesn't necessarily sound right, or that doesn't, like, that's probably not going to be applicable because of XYZ reasons. It's not because I dislike you. It's not meant to be something that's taken personally. It's like I view it as kind of like I'm commenting on the thought. I'm not commenting on you.
Wow, just hearing you talk about debate, I never realized it, but that must be so hard for FE users. For us, it would seem easier because, we're just looking at the argument, but I don't know, do FE users have a harder time not taking it personally? I guess it depends on the topic. If it's a morality versus, something else.
Yeah. I wonder if it's like a thinking and feeling general thing too. Like thinkers tend to be able to take things more impersonally, whereas feelers are generally more personal. Yeah.
For me,
as a whole.
For me, it doesn't feel like so much of a debate. I mean, it's technically a debate, but it feels more like we're building off of each other's knowledge and just growing together. So, I make it known that, look, I'm not trying to attack or anything like that. I'm actually loving this right now. Let's grow from this because, I have my way of thinking about it, but I definitely like taking in what other people say too and considering it and spitting it out if I don't think it's really good, and refining what I know. And so it's kind of like those Socratic discussions you have in the college classroom where, those discussions can get extremely interesting because you're learning. You take the readings a certain way. Everyone's got their way of doing it, of taking in the information. And then when everyone comes together and has those discussions or debates, it feels really good.
It's kind of strange, but I actually view debates kind of as a cooperative experience from my side, in which I view it as like, let's just cut the argument. Let's just cut the reasons, right? Like if this reasoning holds, then it's objectively the best that we can come up with. If it's not, then there were holes in it. It's like, it's also the reason why it's like I actually appreciate when people tell me straight up if they have feedback for me, right? Like if they tell me like, hey, actually you didn't do such a great job on that, here's how you can improve. I don't take that personally, and I actually appreciate that because I'm like, oh, now I know and I can get better.
Yeah, I think other reason that maybe we don't take things as personally, maybe because we're FI users, and so we understand that everyone has their own unique way of looking. We don't necessarily think it really relates to something that we did. It could be just that's their perspective. It doesn't mean I did something wrong, but at the same time, we are open to constructive criticism. In other words, I'm not trying to say that we don't listen to them or care. We just don't take it personally.
Yeah. It sounds a lot.
I do. I take it personal, but maybe it's just me. Maybe it's an unhealthy trait on my end or something. But no, I definitely go back and think about it and see if I can fix anything or adjust or whatever.
It depends on what it is. I mean, FI, you're going to go back later and think about it, but it depends on the scenario. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was wondering if it depends on the debate topic and what's your identity function, because like TI users would probably get offended if you like question their logical conclusions, where it's like with FI we're more offended if you like question my values. Like if you're questioning my values, I'd be like, I don't really owe an explanation for that. That's how my FI is like.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so FI, everyone's experience with FI.
I think
it's personal.
I think with FIT, I usually feel there's this power struggle, and I think one of the biggest things I've learned in my life is to just sometimes I have to let my emotions just feel them, and I don't always have to like find a solution or find the reason for like why I'm feeling something specific. It's just is. And I think so it's kind of like that power struggle sometimes, because T wants to solve the issue and FI is like, no, like this isn't something you can't really solve. This is just an emotion which you have to feel and then like process through, and like it'll go away eventually when the time is right. And just trying to like work between that and like letting FI be, and slowly starting to incorporate my FI values and how I feel just into like my NI model of how I want to do things, and my T of like, okay, this will probably like not go down well with my FI, so I'm just gonna alter the way I approach this in a more way that accounts for my emotions instead of like just brute forcing my way through things. That's kind of my experience.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I think that we'll TE rationalize our FI. So it's like we'll rationalize like whether that emotional state is appropriate or not based on kind of the sequence of events that we're in at that time or what's going on. We'll be like, I kind of feel sad, but like I'm not gonna, it doesn't make sense to feel sad right now based on these other things that need to happen, right? So we'll rationalize that emotion. And I think the growth area of that, like you're saying, like it's okay to have just to be in that emotion for a period of time and to deal with it, but to go through it and experience it for the sake of it, not kind of like building up under the hood later. And I look at FI leads, people who have that FI either first or second, and they're so unapologetic with the things that they like and the things that are important to them. And it's just like, they don't have to apologize for anything. Like they don't have to hide anything behind that. They're just like, yeah, I love, whatever it is. And we're just not thinking in that direction. But I think it's healthy to look at that unapologetic nature of people who have FI high, and at least for myself, and look at that and be like, how can I emulate that in my own interactions, in my own reflection towards myself, in order to like bump that function up? How can I look like a I blank FP in a way, in terms of how I'm personifying that FI, just for the sake of the practice of it versus anything else? Because I really feel like especially like our FI and our SC, they're like muscles that need to be flexed, and the moment that you think that you don't have to flex them anymore is the moment it starts to deteriorate. So
yeah, I think I often view like my FI as if it's like it's supposed to be this dialogue, but sometimes it becomes a tug of war between the FI and the TE. Like most recently, in the year 2020, I was trying to get into investing because I knew for a while that I had several projects that I needed time for. And I was like, okay, I don't see myself working throughout my life, right? Like I want to focus my time on these projects as opposed to a job, but I still need a source of income. So I should start investing. And my dad's an investor. So he's like, 2020 is the perfect time for you to get in right now. With the market going down, you can buy stocks for really cheap. And I was like, yeah, I knew that I needed to try it out for a chance at what I wanted to realize, the vision of myself that I wanted to realize. But I would find myself at the end of the day being completely exhausted, that all I wanted to do was read a book, not look at the screen anymore. And I remember just being so upset in myself, like really, really upset, in which I was like, this doesn't make sense. I have 24 hours in a day, 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours to work. 8 hours should be enough for me to get this thing done. And it's important for what I'm trying to accomplish in the future. Why am I too tired to get it done, right? And then I realized that I was like trying to find a reason for myself to feel upset instead of going, oh, that's just how I'm feeling. It's a conscious process that I learned from an INFP to spend more time journaling, for example, because if like FI is something that I often feel like my TE steps in and tries to put a hold of, tries to go, there's not really a reason for you to feel that way, so why are you feeling that way, right? And sometimes it's important for me to physically journal, because it's like in journaling, I put a space for myself. Like I intentionally go, okay, this is a space for me to explore the depths of whatever I'm feeling without it having to be rationally okay to feel that way.
Yeah, I definitely feel that tug with the TEFI. For me, it's like my feelings about things are so like, nobody else would understand them. It feels so unreachable. So I find myself like I have to escape and like go somewhere where nobody is. Like I'll go for a drive, and I will be talking myself through my emotions or what I'm feeling about something. And it's like necessary because I feel the need to externalize it, but I'm always asking myself, like, why am I feeling this way exactly? And it's like, it's almost like I'm journaling out loud, and I will be driving for like an hour and a half, or I'll park somewhere where nobody is and I'll just keep going, or like cry it out and not even be sure exactly. I can't really pinpoint it, what it is that, I might have an inkling, but it's like, I feel like I'm problem solving at the same time with that TE kind of pushing in and trying to help bring it out. It feels very alive. It feels really good to do it. It's just, it's tedious. It takes a lot out of me, but it's, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Actually, I really like it.
Yeah, most people, most INTJs I've heard other INTJs say the same thing, that you feel like you're trying to find a reason for your feelings. I've never noticed that exactly. For me, it's more like I'm trying to solve the root cause of whatever might have brought something negative into my life that made me feel bad. And when I was younger, I noticed that I would just kind of tune out my feelings or just kind of ignore them. Like I'd say my teens or early 20s. And then I realized quickly that that was not going to work. You have to take your feelings into account. They matter. They're just as important as your TE goals. And so I learned early to do that, but I never felt like I had to explain, I never had to justify them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I did, and I still do this constantly. I always try to go to the root of it and hash it out, and that's gotten me into, for many years, I guess 3 decades, I'm really spiritual, because I'm always looking at how feelings, relate to you, creating your own reality and all of that. So for me, it's almost like I'm applying TE to my emotions, or I'm just letting them be, just allowing them to be. But I don't feel there's a tug of war. But I just heard lots of INTJs say that, so I think it's pretty common.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's something that I had to get better with, like consciously. For a period of my life, like I would get annoyed whenever like a certain feeling like started expressing itself, because I saw it as detracting away from what I was trying to accomplish. I was like, this is an inconvenient time to be feeling this, push it aside, I'm going for this, right? And then inevitably it would just burst out at some like very, very strange moment later on. And my INFP friend gave me this metaphor in which she said, like, basically, like, emotions are kind of like water and you're the pipe, right? It's flowing through you. And what you're trying to do was block the water. And then the pipe bursts and you blame the water when in fact you should be addressing the blockage, right? That was what really, like, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I should start putting more space to like actually let these emotions be. And that was what sold me on journaling, really.
Yeah, I started journaling really young too, so maybe it just never got to the point where, you're saying, where it kind of starts to explode out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like it started with that tug of war, and I love that analogy of like the water. So it's kind of like as I've grown, I've learned how to use that like flow of water and to make it work with tea. Okay, let's use this as a source of inspiration for something, or like channel this energy into something that's create something meaningful, or like inspire me to do something else instead of like blocking it essentially. And yeah, that has been like, personally for me, it has been like very important for my health in general.
Yeah, I definitely relate. For me, my FI is definitely more of a struggle, and it always kind of has been. When I was younger, I would definitely suppress what I was feeling in order to keep, whether it was doing my schoolwork, helping resolve issues, trying to figure out my own problems. It almost felt like they would just get in the way, or like, I'm feeling this way and it's just not conducive to what I'm trying to do right now. So I'll deal with it later. And over time, I've gotten better about that. But I do still find myself trying to rationalize the emotions, almost like, okay, come on, let's figure this out. Like, I got to get some stuff done, let's deal with this and then, move on. And definitely being with an ISFP has helped me grow in that area significantly because that's, his expertise. And he'll point out, I think I tweeted about this too, but he actually pointed out, I think a few weeks ago, he's like, you always get frustrated when you're feeling anything. And I'm like, well, yes, because it's inhibiting my process that I typically go through. It's not something I routinely have to do. And so for me, I'm still trying to find that process of just feeling them without rationalizing them so that I can then continue to be productive with my goals. And I think that it's also funny to me that we're all kind of bringing up stress-related incidents of FI, because I think when things are going well, it's kind of just running in the background, doing its thing, keeping you motivated. And it only really comes to attention when there's kind of issues or a conflict or, something unpleasant happening. And you're just kind of like, whoa, where's that kind of coming from? That's another thing, at least for me, because I'm not super in tune with it and still kind of learning to be, I feel more removed from it. So, I never say like, oh, I am sad or I'm anxious. I'm always like, I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling sad. But it's kind of like a step removed from myself. Like, I know it's happening, but I haven't sat down to think about why or figure out like, the cause or the root of it, like some of you guys were saying. So I think, I just might have more of an issue with it, just adjusting to letting myself feel. But being with a high FI user and having their experience shared and kind of like Lindsay said, where they just own it and are perfectly happy with it and have no problem or shame around it, has definitely helped me work on those skills as well. And also, they're constantly reminding me, feel your feelings. So that's kind of my own personal experience with FI.
Mm-hmm. And Andrea?
Yeah, for me, I kind of relate more to what Holly was saying. I mean, I feel like I relate to both extremes a little bit because, well, my approach to FI is very much just based on, well, like my approach to everything. I just really want to understand it. So I'm not really looking to, judge my own emotions. I just really want to know where they're coming from. And as a kid, that was a problem because I had no idea. I had no idea where emotions, how they worked or where they were coming from. So I did definitely lean more towards like, let's suppress it. Let's like ignore it. Let's not let it mess with whatever we're trying to do here. But as I've gotten older and I've learned more about like psychology and just spent a lot more time working with my FI, I have reached a point where I do feel like I understand it to a pretty deep level. And so now I don't feel like I have much conflict with it at all. In fact, I think it's one of my favorite functions. Although I also think that I'm a jumper in the OP system. But I actually go out looking for FI things. So yeah, now more on that side of things.
I was going to say this could depend on if you're a jumper or not, because I feel like jumpers probably maybe dive into understanding feelings earlier, or just maybe don't. And if you're a TE, if you're the standard INTJ, you might be more annoyed by your feelings getting in the way of your TE.
Yeah, I think that could be true because actually, I will say that I did reach a point where it was a TE decision to start developing FI, where I very much saw that, okay, my undevelopment in emotional matters is very much hindering my, potential for moving forward. And so at that point, it was very much a TE decision of like, okay, no, we need to like address this problem. But then once I actually started understanding FI more, then I appreciated it more for what it was.
That's a beautiful, full-hearted embrace of FI, Andrea. And so, and so SE, everyone's experience with SE.
The love-hate is so true. The love-hate relationship with SE. In college, I was walking across campus. This is at A&M, Texas A&M, and one day I was like, God, the grass is so beautiful. They were making fun of me because I was noticing this vibrant green grass, and I was just talking about the nature. That's what I always do. And they just thought that was just so silly or funny, you know. They're like, yeah, it's green. But sometimes nature, just, and SE in general, like, you know, decorating my house or making sure that out every window is a nice view of a flower, some flowers or something. SE is like super, it's a way for me to tap into some exquisite feelings that I can't hardly even get from NI sometimes. It's just can be really delicious, as Arlinda doesn't like to hear about. But a lot of times, you know, it's kind of the bane of my existence too, because it's like wading through molasses to get through some chores occasionally. And I kind of had to just say, look, you just have to have some discipline and just do it. Just do the dishes every night, which I still don't do, but, you know, just do this every week, do this. Otherwise it's just going to overwhelm you. So that's kind of the two sides of SE for me.
Mm-hmm.
People who are close to me will make jokes about that I have to INTJ proof, or they have to INTJ proof everything that, and it's more like, it's a novel joke, but at the same time, it's just like the interactions. Like, I mean, like a few years ago, like I had saved up to get my laptop, and like I was like, all right, like I'm taking the bite of this, like this MacBook Pro. And I'm like, I have to order like my case like right away, like a protective case around it, you know? And the case was like back ordered like 2 days. I'm like, I can get by 2 days like without having the case on it, you know? I'm like, I'm really careful and whatever. Anyway, the cord doesn't have a breakaway cord, and someone startled me at my desk. I like hit the cord, my laptop goes flying off the desk. It has a nice dent on the left side of it now that it's now covered with the protective case that was like supposed to be on it. But it's just like, I know I have to have everything like double bag sealed, you know, shut. My cup has to have a lid with the straw that's sealed on the inside, because it's like, that is the level of unawareness that's just happening default all the time. But if you know that you're prone to those things, okay, you can account for that in your life and in your dealings, you know? So like, that's like the negative side. On the positive side, it's, you know, I can put the NI focus into doing just one, like SE, like one kind of SE over and over again until I get really good at it. So that's, I think the benefit is that if it takes me, you know, 2 years to like learn a skill or like something like that, and I just have to keep, you know, doing it and practicing it, I'm going to be terrible at it for a really long time. And I have no problem, you know, saying that. But it's like, okay, then find me in a few years and look at me doing that skill. You're gonna be like, oh, she looks like a professional in that SC thing over there. It's like, yeah, I've been working on it for years. I mean, I've been trying to learn how to do a handstand now for over 10 years, okay? Like I try to practice as much as I can, like a few mornings a week. And I still can't do the stupid handstand, but it's like, I am going to be able to do the handstand. Like find me in 5 years and I'll be able to do that stupid handstand and hold it for, you know, a few seconds. And so I think that's kind of both sides of it. And we can elevate ourselves in that area. So.
Yeah, when INTJs are able to tap into their SE, they do it in a kind of controlled way. So LiJo is specifically trying to become better at handstands. And so sometimes when SE is in the inferior slot, it's like you can do it, but it's almost like you're putting your attention into that specific thing to make it. So
just one.
Just one SE thing.
Yeah, and because it's your inferior function, you probably also, you can tend to forget. You have to like practice over and over and over again because it's not a focus. You have to be very deliberate. Yeah, I agree with that.
SE is a function that I'm not too aware of, so I think I'll just comment on like the sensory in general. but it's like I experience it in two ways. The first of which is like Holly. Sometimes it feels like a lens switch, like focusing, zooming in and out, in which it's like at very rare moments, sometimes it's like I am completely astonished by the vivid vibrancy of reality. I'm like, wow, you know, the trees are so beautiful and the flowers are so beautiful. These are the things that can spur on inspiration for a poem. You know, it's like because I'm suddenly like noticing all these things. But it's like most of the time it does feel like it's very, like I, more so than the FITE dynamic, I feel very strongly that in the way that like the intuition and sensory like interact within me, I feel very strongly that the sensory interacts in service of the intuition. It's always in that way. Like it's not so much like with feeling and thinking. Sometimes it can be like, okay, if I really decide to give myself space to explore the emotion, I might delve into that a bit more. If I really want to be tapping into the TE, I could delve into that. But with NISE, it's very much like the SE is in service of the NI.
I have to agree. I feel like that SE is in service, yes, of the NI. It definitely feeds me. I love going out for like, I have to go outside at least once a day, okay? I like to do like mini hikes. We've got great trails out here. And I love being out in nature. And then I like to like travel too. So I'll like study up on a place and then I'll go there and like, you know, go through the museums and like interact with the people if I can, if I know that language. And then I've also done like a studied abroad once, and it just feels really good to get out of my element and be present. Sometimes I do notice that it's for short amounts of time that I'm there, but I do feel like it feels really exhilarating and it just really feeds me. It's very exciting, but then it's like, okay, after about a certain amount of time, back to NI. You know, I have to go and put the blankets back over my head and done.
Yeah, where it's most obvious is like I was interacting and having a conversation with an ESFP at one point, and I was telling them about, you know, my discoveries relating to FE based off of my interaction with my ISFJ friend, right? I was going like, oh, I understand better now how FI versus FE works because of this interaction and this conversation with her, immediately extrapolating towards a pattern of FI, FE users, right? That generalization. And he was like, oh, but you're lacking experience. That's just one person. You know, it's like you got to go out there more and like interact with more people. You know, it's like to be able to make that overarching theme and claim. So it's like that's where I notice like the whole NI over SE or SE over NI.
Yes. And Andria?
Yes, I highly, highly relate to like the mind-body disconnect. Like that is so real. And yeah. I think a lot of my insecurities come from SE things, like what we were saying earlier about using NI to like kind of control the SE chaos. I find that I'm like insecure about really dumb things, or just worried about like, what if this one little SE thing happens and I like am not capable of handling it, and that stresses me out. And then it's always fine. But I have noticed the past year specifically, like with lockdown, I noticed, and I think you might have mentioned this in one of your videos, Joyce, but like two different kinds of SE engagement where like historically for me, in my experience, I've always tended more towards the really active SE, where I really enjoy like fast moving sports, or like being really immersed in some kind of movement outside, or just manipulating the environment in some TE-SE manner. And that has always been like my experience with SE. A lot of my hobbies are that type of SE type of thing. But this past year, I've kind of started more on the other side of SE, which is much more like observing or just like being present in SE. And you're not really interested in just like moving things or specifically engaging in things, so that you can just, you know, experience what it's like to be like fully aware. And so like the difference between awareness and engagement, I feel like, is a distinction between SE users that maybe is not apparent at first sight.
Fascinating.
I think my personal experience with SE is rough. It's both exhausting and exhilarating at the same time. And sometimes I joke that it'd be nice to be non-corporeal, so I can just pass through things and walls and not have to like interact with the sensory. But it's also nice. It kind of, as a lot of you mentioned, comes in those like moments of inspiration, and you're like, wow, this actually exists. But I think my experience with SE, it's like sometimes because I'm so NI, it's like, oh, like sometimes I'm like, oh, the SC, I have to pay attention to it. Like I work in chemistry, so when I started out very early, it was like things when colors change or when like a gas is given off. Those things are important, and you have to know that. I'm like, why is that relevant? And sometimes my friends, like I've gotten better, but like younger, they'd be like, oh, let's go out and like walk around town, and I'm like, what's the point? What are we getting out of that? It's just like SE. Like I didn't know how to appreciate it, but I think now that like I've been trying to more actively incorporate it, it's like I like doing one little thing at a time with SE. But again, the thing with the sensory is like it all comes at you at the same time, and I'm like, oh, too much. Just I need to do it like one thing at a time. But yeah, and also one thing I've noticed is this like with muscle memory, when you're doing something like SE task for the first time and you're like, why isn't this working out? So I'm following this exactly how it's supposed to be. And you're like, and others are like, oh, it'll get better by practice. There's no like stepwise or a plan to it. It's muscle memory. The more you do it, the better you get at it. There's no like logic or pattern behind it. It just is. And that's something I think that's where I appreciate my SE, where it's like with practice, it definitely does get better.
I really relate to that non-corporeal thing. Like an argument that I used to bring up to my parents, which they found very disturbing. I was telling them like, what is the reasoning behind a physical existence? Like, why do I need a body? It's like my mind can go to destinations in a fraction of the time that my body can actually transfer and like travel there, right? So I was like, what's the reasoning? Why can't I just be a floating consciousness? Like, why can't I exist in that form? And my parents found that very disturbing. It wasn't actually until recently when I finally locked on to like what I wanted to materialize in the future that I started taking better care of my body, because I was like, oh, I understand that to materialize this thing that I want in the future, I will need my body to do that in the physical medium. So taking active measures like I'm really bad with staying hydrated, really bad with staying hydrated. When I get really sucked into something, 5 hours goes by and I'm like, why am I dizzy? Oh, wait, I didn't drink at all today. It's like I physically have to put in an alarm system just to be like, it's lunchtime. Disturb me from my NI mulling so I don't spend like 20 hours plus in this just like ether world, forgetting of my bodily existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you had a question for tips for young INTJs, and I definitely would go with that. I have alarms for everything throughout the day. To drink water, I put the cup on my nightstand so I will remember, because I can fully really want to do it, but I have feminine SE and I will forget every day. It's like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to create that new routine with drinking water. I can go a whole day. I can go a whole day with fasting water and never even really realize it. But yeah, the alarms are great. If you're a young INTJ, man, get the iPhone out and program everything in to remind you.
I do the alarms too, but they stress me out. It's like, oh gosh, there's something else that's supposed to happen right now. What is it again? Oh, okay. I'm set. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Everything's scheduled out, but it's like, it goes off like 20 times a day.
I know, it's like SE is constantly coming at us. We just want to be in our head. Just leave us alone.
I think it's like,
then the weekend comes and that's great. No alarms,
Yeah, it's like balancing. Ideally, I want to stay in my head for as long as possible, but I know that the reality is I have a body that I need to take care of. Sometimes it feels like a burden, yes. And then it's like these alarms, like they feel like they're disturbing, but I have to, because I know that like if I continue on this path of staying so absorbed in my NI and forgetting to drink, I know that that's probably going to lead to something nasty in my body like years from now.
Yeah, and Bernadette, I wanted to say my mom at the INFJ, she and I used to talk about that. I think I actually brought it up that I wish we could just be like these floating heads and disembodied consciousness, you know, and she totally was with me on that.
Yeah, it's hard to relate to. And Ashleigh?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. The mind-body disconnect struggle is definitely real for me. I mean, I could go all day without eating or drinking water or even realizing I haven't said a word all day. Like sometimes my existence is just so minimal, so I can do the work or the project or whatever it is that I'm trying to do, and I'll just completely forget to maintain those kind of SE things. Another way it shows up for me is the lack of inaction, the like, you know, just do the thing. That tends to be really tough for me sometimes if it's not something I really want to do. I've also compared it kind of to a cat's whiskers, where it kind of gives you an approximation of your environment, but like cats still get stuck in the craziest places because they're not actually paying attention or they just disregard the information. So, you know, I can like walk through a crowd while reading and avoid people just fine. But, you know, anything else where I have to be consciously aware of my environment or what my body's doing is just a mess. So that's kind of my struggle with it. And, you know, I do enjoy SE relieving activities like being out in nature. I definitely relate to being amazed by it sometimes, you know, when I'm actually taking time to sit and pay attention. A lot of the time in college, I would just sit in my backyard and kind of observe the ecosystem and the different animals and critters that would come in and out. And that would be really de-stressing for me because it was me almost meditating in the moment, observing everything around me rather than being up in my head. So things like that kind of tend to help me get that satisfaction. But for the most part, my SE is pretty low and I have a hard time being aware of it. In most instances.
Cat's whiskers is the perfect way to put inferior SE. Like it's enough to navigate, but it's not like you're not super focused. And then yeah, wow, beautifully put. And so thank you INTJs for coming out and sharing your beautiful INTJ thoughts. I really appreciate it. Thank you, LiJo, for just the wonderful INTJ content you continuously put out time and time again, and it is really bang on to the INTJ experience, and you really represent female INTJs like this panel, and so you really provide some really high quality content. So thank you for just enriching the type space with that. And so Ashleigh, it was really nice to hear about your experiences with your ISFP partner and how it's contrasted with you. And I just really appreciate the metaphors and analogies you have for the functions. Like the cat's whiskers is like perfectly put for how SE feels like in the inferior slot. And I was like, that was like the perfect metaphor. So thank you for blessing us with that amazing way to put it. And thank you, Rodella, for just mentioning about that, like feeling like a floating being that is kind of like a ball of ideas and like thoughts, and rather than feeling like a real person, like feeling like a vessel for almost insight rather than a real person. Like I really related to that, Rodella, and just your way of putting that's like me encapsulated. So yeah, you captured the intuitive experience and the NI-DOM experience like really well with that imagery. And yeah, Holly, thank you so much for always trying to make the world more sustainable and for wanting to create like a YouTube channel to raise awareness for sustainability. By the way, sustainability is a key word for NI. So that's basically what you're doing is very NI related, looking out for the long-term consequences and the long-term implications of something and wanting the ripple effects to be positive and to leave a positive feedback cycle instead of a negative feedback cycle. So you're really doing that with your work, Holly. And Bernadette, you gave some bang on insights today. Your ability to articulate your experience so well. I always find it so adorable when you sign off your messages with me with best regards. It's beautifully formal. I love it. But yes, stellar insights. I really liked listening to you talk during this panel, and you offered a lot of just piercing NI insights. Just the way you talked about NI, peeling back the layers to get to the core. It is so true. It rings so true. So thank you for that. And Arlinda, I love how you use the word delish. That was amazing. No, look, it was fantastic because it really is delicious, like to NI, to be in that NI space. It feels the best. It literally is delish. That was such a good way of putting it. And it gives you SE imagery too, because you can imagine like the 5 senses and it being delicious. And so it kind of gives us a life lesson. Being in our default state is kind of delicious. And if you're feeling like your life is a little stale, like lacking that flavor, then consider maybe your dominant function isn't getting that stimulation that it needs. So thank you, Arlinda, for that insight. And Andria, I really like your Twitter posts. I really like them, and I know maybe you don't want more followers because you're kind of shy and private. But I'm sorry if I send more your way. But I've always been like a follower of your Twitter account, and I've always loved the beauty of your mind. So you're an INTJ who tends to have stronger FI, and it shows in the deep thoughtfulness of your posts. They're so beautiful, like beautifully thought out. And I've always been a silent stalker and lurker of yours. So it's nice to meet you in video format. Yeah. And so, yeah, thank you, INTJs, for making the world a more efficient place and helping people solve their problems. You really help them find a solution that works. And you guys are just blessings to the world and society with your ability to pace out the long-term consequences of something and to truly, you guys provoke thought. And so thank you for being thought provokers, and thank you for just being you. And I'll see everyone in the next episode.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.